Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're talking about the film The Longest Day, which came out in 1962. It was produced by Daryl Zanuck, directed by Ken Anakin for the British and French exteriors, Andrew Martin for the American exteriors, and Bernard Wicki for the German scenes. It was written by Cornelius Ryan with additional material written by Romain Gary, James Jones, David Purcell, and Jack Seddon. The film was nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, and won awards for Best Cinematography, Black and White, and Best Special Effects. It's based on the book of the same name, a nonfiction account of D-Day, June 6, 1944, by Cornelius Ryan, which was published in 1959. The book has sold tens of millions of copies, and Ryan has been described as the man who invented D-Day. The title comes from a comment that German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel made to his aide on April 22nd, 1944. Believe me, Lang, the first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. The fate of Germany depends on the outcome. For the Allies as well as Germany, it will be the longest day. What did you think of this movie?
I thought it was long. I did enjoy it. Although I did tell you halfway through it that I was kind of bored, and I was. There's a lot of names in this, like commanders and decision makers, and Germans not agreeing with each other. And I did enjoy parts of it more than others. I thought the acting was kind of janky from some of the actors because there are a lot of big names in this who only have, a cameo, like a couple of scenes. And not all of them are very good. I didn't enjoy John Wayne very much. I thought he was kind of clunky. But overall, what it does really well is show you the scale of the invasion of Normandy, and it shows you different perspectives, and it really kind of almost makes it hard to believe that this is actually how it happened. But I enjoyed that about it, and I enjoyed particularly the French civilian that's in this. That made me laugh quite a bit. But I think I tried to compare it to A Bridge Too Far, which I enjoyed a lot more. So it's not my favorite. How about you?
I enjoyed this movie, I will say. It's in black and white, and the reason for that primarily is that they wanted to include real footage from D-Day, which had been filmed on the day and was obviously in black and white, and I think they integrate it really seamlessly. I think that this movie, it is a docudrama style, kind of like Tora 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 or The Battle of Britain, but where I think this movie really benefits is from Ryan's innate knack as a historical storyteller, like his ability to build a narrative around historical events. And I watched a talk about him by the Library of America, and they describe his writing style as like he tells you not only what happens, but he explains what it was like. And I think that's huge as like a popular historian as a way to like connect to people. And even Ryan says in the forward in the like little introductory preface part of his book that this is a story about the people who were at D-Day. And I do think that we get that in the movie, that this like brilliant array of characters, some of which are people who are momentous decision makers and some of whom are just enlisted guys whose names we don't even really learn. And I went into this movie prepared not to like John Wayne, and I actually liked him better than I was expecting.
Yeah, no, I will agree there that they did try to get all of Ryan's characterizations into the movie. I just think, having read maybe a third of the book, I didn't finish in time, but I think the book is better at it, which makes sense because you have so many characters to introduce in it's a long movie, but it's not long enough to introduce all of them in the same way. But they did try, so I give them A for effort. But I don't think I would necessarily want to watch this one again, whereas, for instance, A Bridge Too Far I probably would watch again.
I think I would watch this one again if I were in the mood to watch a really good battle scene, because there are quite a few of them in this movie.
Yeah, I also liked when they scale the rocks at Ponty Hawk. I thought was quite exciting. And basically all the battle scenes that are in the second half of the movie are really fun and exciting. So I will say I like the second half of the 3-hour movie a lot more than the first half. Although, I did find the Germans more entertaining than the Americans and the Brits.
Yeah, there were some good Germans in here. I'm excited to talk about them, and some good character acting, I would say, by a lot of these background people who only appear for maybe a minute or 2, but you're solidly entertained by their presence.
Yes, agree.
Just briefly about Ryan, obviously, he wrote A Bridge Too Far, so we talked about him somewhat when we did that episode, but he was born in 1920, so he was a young man when World War II was going on, and he was a war correspondent. He was a journalist by trade before he ever wrote history books, and he actually covered the 8th Air Force, which we had discussed in our Masters of the Air episode. So he flew 14 bombing runs, including one on D-Day. So he was actually there. And he returned to Normandy 5 years later and he was on the beaches and he was just seeing this debris that was still left from obviously one of the most momentous battles in history. And it inspired him to start work on his first World War II book. And it became kind of an obsession for him. He got super into it. And so The Longest Day was the first World War II book that he published, and I think you can tell, having read The Longest Day and A Bridge Too Far, I think A Bridge Too Far is more his writing style is more developed, which is fair enough. There's like 15 years between the publishing dates there, but he originally planned to write 5 World War II books, and he published 3. So there's the 2 I mentioned, and there's also one about the Battle of Berlin right at the end of the war. But unfortunately, while he was writing A Bridge Too Far, he was like less than 50 pages in when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so he cranked out the remaining entirety of the book in like 5 months, knowing that he was running out of time. And he just had this really, really in depth process where he would place ads reaching out to veterans and civilians and people who were at these various historical events. And he would place ads that were like, "Did you see anything like really courageous or really stupid at D-Day? Like, I want to know all these interesting stories that you don't normally see in a history book." And he ended up doing thousands of interviews with people. I think you really see that come to fruition in the book where you get just such a extraordinary panoramic view of the events that he's covering. And his wife was a successful editor. She supported the family when he took time off from his career to write, so I thought that was pretty badass as well. Such a giant in the world of popular history writing. Like, I really think there's no one better than him.
What a shame that he didn't get to write those other two, right? Makes me so sad. Just for anyone, really, to get a terminal cancer diagnosis. But to have such a talent storytelling and then to not finish your work is so sad.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Shall we get into the movie because it's a long one?
It sure is.
The movie is bookended by a shot of a lone helmet lying upturned on the beach. We hear the very typical BBC broadcasting, the famous London calling messages, which will be relevant since this is how the Allies communicate with the French resistance. Everything is quiet in the sleepy French villages along the Normandy coast for now.
Yes, fun history tidbit. The song London Calling by The Clash, the title is taken from these dispatches during World War II.
Yeah, I would play it in the podcast, but I think I would get sued.
Probably. I don't think Joe Strummer would be mad. He's long since passed away. He seems like a chill dude.
He won't come back to hunt us then, I guess.
Yeah, so some context. For the Germans, they're not losing the war yet, quote unquote, but things are not looking great. The Soviets are in Poland. They've pushed the Germans back that far. The Allies are at the gates of Rome. I believe that Rome was taken, I wanna say June 5th. It was a day or a couple of days before D-Day. So the Germans know that an Allied offensive is coming in Northwestern Europe. They don't know when exactly, and they don't know where, but most of them assume it will be at Pas de Calais, not at Normandy. And the main reason for this is that Pas de Calais is where the English Channel is narrowest. If you land there, that's your kind of quickest route to get into Germany from the coast. Nobody really thinks that the Allies are going to attack at Normandy because it's just not very convenient. Like, there's not really any ports there. Yeah, and meanwhile, on the Allied side, plans for the invasion, as you can imagine, massive undertaking. They've been ongoing for over a year. What I enjoyed in this movie is in Morse code, a V is dot, 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 dash. And people noticed that this really had a similarity to the beginning of Beethoven's Fifth, which is da 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 da. And so that was like quite a famous, I don't know, little like song that got played a lot during World War II, little sound effect, little ditty. And so they use that as the basis for the score in this movie, and I quite like it.
It's fun, and they never get around to the conclusion of the song. Like, they never finished the actual theme of Beethoven's Fifth. And that made me laugh too. It's like always just a tiny hint of it.
Yeah.
We will gradually be introduced to all of the major figures on both sides. There are a lot. Guys, we haven't named all of them, but we do name the biggest ones. So on the German side, we begin with Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, played by Paul Hardman. He's in charge of all German forces on the Western Front. Then there's Major Werner Pluskat, played by Hans Christian Blech. What a great name. He was the CO of the 352nd Infantry Division, and he was stationed at the beach fortifications in Normandy. We see him later in a bunker on the beach. He's very funny. And we also get, and this is also who the book opens with, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, played by Werner Hinz, who's the CO of Army Group B, and he's inspecting his beach fortifications. In the book, it actually starts with him planning to leave, which I thought was funny.
Yes. So Rommel developed many of the beach fortifications himself, and you see them in the movie. There's these like long sticks poking out of the mud that have a mine on top of them. Like he literally was just, how can I create all of these different ways to make a beach landing really bloody and difficult for the Allies? The Germans had not begun work on their Atlantic Wall fortifications until late 1942 because initially, right, they thought they might be the ones invading Britain. It was always, we're going to be on the offensive. Hitler did not think that they would need to defend, quote unquote, Fortress Europe. And so they started the work in late 1942. And people got the sense that the Atlantic Wall was almost complete. And certainly Rommel had that sense. And then he got there in late 1943 in France, and he was flabbergasted by how incomplete it was. There was just places where it was not fortified at all. There was certainly nowhere was fortified up to his exacting specifications. And so he immediately came up with a plan to make improvements and get shit done. And so just before D-Day, in fact, he had set a deadline for completion of anti-invasion obstacle programs of June 20th because he thought that, the Allies didn't invade in May when the weather was perfect. So they're probably now not going to invade until the Soviets start their summer offensive. And the Soviets are not going to attack on the Eastern Front until the melt is over. So the Soviets are going to attack maybe in July. And he figures, okay, at this point on the Western Front, they'll probably try and time it so that those two invasions happen at the same time. And as we know, he was not correct about this, but it just goes to show that he was really on top of this whole fortification thing. And him and von Rundstedt disagreed fundamentally on the method by which Germany should respond to an Allied invasion. So you have von Rundstedt, who thinks that this Atlantic Wall is more of a propaganda thing for Hitler than anything. He doesn't really think it's going to do anything other than temporarily obstruct the Allies. But what he does think is that this will allow the Germans time to gather and regroup and bring in reinforcements and attack the Allies in force while they're still trying to get organized and get their supply lines going, et cetera, et cetera. Rommel believes that any Allied attack needs to be smashed and driven back into the sea immediately. He's like, we don't have time to wait. We can't be bringing up reinforcements. We have to stop them on the beach. And he actually said, the war will be won or lost on the beaches. We'll have only one chance to stop the enemy, and that's while he's in the water.
Who do you think is right?
I mean, I think it's difficult to say, to be honest. I mean, von Rundstedt, if you think about it, he was the one at the beginning of the war where, the French had built their famous Maginot Line, and he was the one who essentially maneuvered around it. So he was like, stationary fortifications in modern warfare don't work. I've seen
Mm,
that it doesn't work.
yeah.
But then, I mean, on the other side, the Germans, as we will see in this movie, were so slow to react to the Allied invasion that they really let the Allies get a foothold that they probably should not have let them get. So maybe there's a happy medium here.
I think I'm inclined to agree. Can I just say from Ryan's book, I enjoyed so much Rommel's correspondence to his wife, where he's guessing about when the Allied invasion will be. And it's all over the place. It's so funny. But also, Roma was the desert fox, right? He was known to be this really cunning man. But at this point in the war, men that knew him, said he looked tired. Like, this man had seen so much war, he had kind of lost his edge a little. But It's really through no fault of his own, I think, that he left for D-Day.
Yeah. Well, and Rommel doesn't live very long after this, right? Like, he gets strafed by an enemy plane in the summer of 44. I wanna say July or August, and then while he's recuperating, Hitler believes that Rommel was involved in the July 20th plot to assassinate him, and so he suggests to Rommel that he kill himself.
He's encouraged to kill himself.
Yes. But von Rundstedt, if you check out A Bridge Too Far, you will see him again.
He lives, unfortunately. I mean, not if you're the Germans, I guess. Then it's fortunately.
The Germans hear a broadcast from the BBC containing the first part of a fateful message, a line from the poem Verlaine that they know places the French resistance on standby. The second line of the poem being broadcast will mean that the Allied invasion is due in 24 hours. The German higher ups are dubious about this, however, because the weather is so bad. Like, it's storming, it's pissing down rain, the waves in the channel are crazy high, and a number of German commanders leave to participate in a war games exercise at Rennes. Meanwhile, Rommel himself leaves for Berlin, and he says a line in the movie that made me laugh. He says, "Can you think of a better time for me to go?"
Yeah, I have to mention something that made me laugh really hard in the movie that happens really early on. They shot a plate of the Normandy beach and they placed the actors in front of it, and Rommel is one of them. And in one shot, he just disappears from the plate. It just made me laugh so much.
He's the desert fox. He's sneaky.
You can't see him, he's just sneaking. Yeah.
Maybe he was wearing his best camouflage that day.
Blue, sea blue camouflage. Yes, I can see it.
Yeah. So in the movie, they focus on the fact that Rommel is going to see his wife, and it's true that his wife's birthday was June 6th, 1944, but he also wanted to go and speak with Hitler personally, and the reason for this was that there were these reserve panzer divisions, and Rommel thought if we want to have any chance of driving the Allies back into the sea when they land in France, wherever it happens to be, we need to have these panzer divisions ready. Like, they have to be there to respond within a couple of hours. We cannot wait. And unfortunately for him, these Panzer Reserve divisions are under Hitler's personal command, so you need to get Hitler's personal say so before they can be moved anywhere. So he decides he's going to go and speak to Hitler in person because, as he says, the last man who sees Hitler wins the game, which really makes me think of a certain world leader today.
Oh my god, don't make it so real.
Yeah, the last guy who whispers in Hitler's ear is the guy whose opinion he has.
What amused me, and I'm sure it was like this in real life, but all of the German commanders are starting to doubt Hitler at this point. They're kind of talking amongst each other, and Hitler's asleep, and no one can get in touch with him, and he's not responding to stuff, and they are thinking he's doing the wrong thing. It's funny to me in hindsight. It wouldn't have been funny at the time because there was a war on, but in hindsight, it's funny to me.
Yeah, there's a real through line with von Rundstedt in this one and in A Bridge Too Far where he cannot be bothered. Like, he really thinks that Hitler is this, like, jumped up little man. He keeps referring to him as that bohemian corporal. He's like, "Why should I have to beg for reinforcements from that bohemian corporal?" Like, he's this old-fashioned military dude, and he thinks that Hitler just doesn't know what he's doing. And von Rundstedt and Hitler had a falling out after this, right? Like, von Rundstedt got removed from his assignment, and then right before Market Garden, he got reinstated because Hitler was like, "Oh yeah, we actually need someone who knows what they're doing," turns out.
He's the guy that says, in both movies, I think, "Have you ever seen me lose?"
Well, he's a little pissed off too, right? Because he's in charge of the Western Front, and then Hitler sends Rommel to come and look at the Atlantic Wall, and Rommel's like, "We need to overhaul everything. We need to get this going." Von Rundstedt obviously disagrees with Rommel about the value of the Atlantic Wall. He thinks it's using up resources they don't need, and he thinks that Rommel is being primed to be his replacement. So he's not very happy that he has to deal with this young buck who's around all up in his business.
Yeah, he's being undermined, clearly.
Yeah.
Across the channel, it is pissing rain on 3 million men waiting to find out if the invasion will be postponed for a second time due to the weather.
There's this exchange between these 2 British soldiers, and the one guy is like, they're sitting in the rain eating some gross slop out of, like, a little bowl, and one of them is like, "Yeah, I'm really worried about my wife, she's having a baby," and the other guy's
Yeah,
like, "Oh, are you excited to be a father?" He's like, "Well, it's not mine. I'm just worried about her."
some of these scenes are really separate from the rest of the movie, but they do add like little flavor to the otherwise quite serious COs we see all the time, so it's quite nice.
The dialogue really gives it a vitality, I find. Like, there's quite a
Yeah.
few little exchanges that really made me smile or, made me sad or whatever. Like, I really felt that the dialogue was well done.
Yeah. There are also men already aboard ships being sick as dogs. And this is when we see Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin H. Vandervoort, played by John Wayne, who's apparently liked more than I did. He's a battalion CO in the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who's training his men extra because he's worried about their landing zone. I did like this whole bit about the landing zone.
Yeah, well, and this was an issue on D-Day because the Germans knew that the Allies were probably going to need to cross that terrain at some point, right? And so they flooded a lot of this low-lying area, and a lot of the paratroopers who landed in places where the water was a lot deeper than they were expecting, and some of them drowned.
And they did it again for the Forgotten Battle, and also for Market Garden, the landing zones were also a problem. So it's just problem after problem. Makes you think, didn't they learn anything? But maybe they just didn't have a choice. I don't know. I'm not in the army. I don't know how it works. We also meet Brigadier General Norman Carter, played by Robert Mitchum. He's Assistant CEO of the 29th Infantry Division, and he just wants to go already. He's just sick of waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, D-Day's already been postponed once, and for the guys who are already on the ships, it's like by the time D-Day gets going, they've been on a ship for 2 or 3 days, and just imagine there's even one scene in the movie where there's 2 guys sitting next to each other, and the one guy says to the other, "Yeah, we've run out of buckets, and we've run out of bowls, and we've run out of whatever." He's like, "The only thing left to throw up in is our helmets."
I think that's the same guy who's talking to the guy whose baby it's not. It's the same dialogue. It's really funny.
We also get lots of enlisted men in this movie. I specifically made a note of Private Arthur Dutch Schultz, played by Richard Beimer, does get mentioned in the book. He was a real guy. He has just won $2,500 at dice against his fellow soldiers as they wait for D-Day to get underway. You know, that classic soldiering game of gambling. But he gets superstitious about it, and he quickly tries to lose the money because he's convinced if he goes into battle broke, then he won't die.
Yeah, because he had a similar thing where he had a little bit of luck before a battle and then he got wounded. So now he's like, oh shit, can't have that again. I enjoyed this character as well, and we see him again later on in the movie, thankfully.
Yeah.
There is a quick cameo by Richard Burton playing a sad sack flight officer David Campbell of the RAF. He's not as much fun as the Germans, they are much funnier. In particular, Lord Colonel Josef Priller, played by Heinz Reinke, who is very displeased that there are all of 2 German fighter planes on the hull of the Western Front.
Yeah, and this is real. I mean, when the Allies flew air cover at D-Day, when they flew bombers and fighter planes and everything, they encountered almost no resistance because the Germans had moved all of their fighter planes back away from the front because they didn't want the Allies bombing their planes while they were sitting on the ground. And the unfortunate result of that is that on D-Day, the Germans only had 2 fighter planes to strafe the beach with.
Felt for these guys. Those other 2 guys that are there are just the dialogue for the Germans is so much more fun than the Allies. I don't know why, but it's just so funny.
I really enjoyed Priller just hollering at his superior over the phone. I really got a kick out of him. I was just chuckling the whole time.
Yeah. There's plenty of hollering to other people in this movie, to be honest.
It's true. Everyone is getting real mad on the phone.
And it's always the Germans being mad on the phone. I don't know what that says about Germans.
Well, I guess they have a lot of reason to be mad on the phone.
Fair.
Yeah, and Richard Burton supposedly was not even supposed to be in this movie, but he was filming something in Rome and he was bored. So he called the producer and he's like, "Can I come be in your movie?" And they're like, "Yeah, if you can come today and we're not paying you." And he's like, "Okay, I'll be there."
I'll add in a quick note then when we're talking about pay, because John Wayne was paid 10 times more than his co-stars, because apparently the director has called one of his other movies a flop. And he got mad and was like, "I can be in your movie, but only if you pay me 10 times more than you pay other people."
Yeah, John Wayne kind of sucks as a person, to be honest. Not a great dude. In this movie, he like when World War II was happening, John Wayne was already older than the character that he's playing. So by 1962, he's just way too old to be playing this character.
To be precise, he's over 2 decades older than the actual Vandervoort that he's playing.
Yeah. Group Captain J.M. Stagg, played by Patrick Barr, whom we will see in the upcoming movie Pressure. He's the meteorologist who's monitoring weather conditions for D Day. He reports on the weather to General Dwight D. Eisenhower, played by Henry Grace, but dubbed by Alan Swift, because Henry Grace wasn't really an actor, I don't think. He was more of a behind the scenes guy, and he got cast because he looked a lot like Eisenhower. Anyway, so J.M. Stagg is doing this presentation to Eisenhower and the other top brass, and it's tough because Eisenhower at this point has already postponed the invasion one day. And what they need is good weather, but they also need a late rising moon because they're dropping paratroopers and they want to drop them in the dark so that they don't get shot out of the sky. And they also need a low tide in the morning. And in order for all of those factors to come together, if they postpone one more day, they have to go June 7th. Otherwise, they won't be able to go for until like the beginning of July. And he's like, we can't be postponing that far. And it's a big deal too, right? It's like you've got all these guys on boats. It's a huge undertaking if you want to postpone this any longer. So he eventually decides, like, yeah, even though the good weather window is pretty short tomorrow, we are going to go ahead with the invasion.
Another fun fact about the movie is that they considered casting Eisenhower as himself in this movie, but he was too old to play himself at the age he was supposed to be, so he didn't end up being cast as himself. But I thought that was funny. He was apparently very keen to be himself in this movie.
That's kind of cute. He's like, can I bring my big ass forehead down for the day?
We're gonna drop some more names because we also meet Brigadier General James M. Gavin, played by Robert Ryan, who's the assistant commander of the 82nd Airborne, and he explains the Pathfinder role to the relevant paratroopers. And because you need more names, there's also Brigadier Simon Fraser, Lord Lovett, played by Peter Lawford, and he's the commander of the 1st Special Service Brigade, and he gets to show off his fancy paratrooper dummies, and I have some more details about these dummies in real life as well in a second. But Gavin, if you remember, is also part of Market Garden. So if you want to learn more about him, you can also go listen to a Bridge to Fire episode. Go listen to that. But these dummies, they were called Ruperts, and in the movie we see them as looking like actual paratroopers. But in real life, they were kind of sacks of sand on parachutes, and they were rigged to explode on landing, so the Germans wouldn't figure out that they were actual dummies. But with these Ruperts, there jumped 6 SAS guys, and they were playing recordings of gunfire. So what we see as actual, like, fireworks wasn't actually what happened. They were just guys playing recordings of gunfire, which is such an SAS thing to do, honestly, to me. But anyway, they did exist. They just didn't look as cool as the ones in the movie.
Well, and it's funny to me too, because obviously they dropped these dummies so that the Germans would assume that, oh, maybe there's an attack happening over there. But it also had the amazing secondary result that some of the Germans found the dummies and they were like, oh, it's just diversionary. Like, there's not even a real attack happening. They're just dropping dummies. So, this actually, if anything, it made the Germans take the invasion less seriously. The French resistance get their secret messages via the broadcast. So the broadcast will say a bunch of nonsense words, and then one of the ones that they hear is John has a long mustache. And when they hear that, they know that they're supposed to go and do their activities to help get France ready for the Allied invasion. So they're going out and they're cutting telephone lines and they're blowing up railroads and they're basically trying to make it hard for the Germans to bring up reinforcements. There's a character called Janine Boitard, played by Irina Demick. She's helping 2 downed Allied pilots to escape, and she has to leave them to help with these sabotage activities. And of course, because she's one of the only women with any dialogue at all in this movie, she has to be an absolute smoke show. Janine Boitard was a real person, but I don't think she looked like this. But anyway, German retaliatory measures were such that by the time of D-Day, the life expectancy of a French resistance fighter was less than 6 months, and women represented anywhere from 15 to 20% of the French resistance. So It's pretty cool because Ryan obviously interviews a lot of these people in his book, and I liked that they included one of the women in the movie.
It just made me laugh that they made her almost have her tits out in the very first scene she's in, on her bike, just looking like an absolute model. In a way she would not have, because she would not have tried to steal the attention like that. But it just made me laugh. Like, they kind of get away with it because she's the only woman besides French locals who are old and grey. But it just made
Yeah.
me laugh.
Yeah, for sure.
The Germans received the second Verlaine message, so the second half of the poem, but they are very slow to act on it. General Erich Marx, played by Richard Monk, who is the CEO of the 84th Army Corps, is even enjoying a birthday party, but don't expect him to eat the cake.
I just need to comment on the fact that when I wrote the words birthday party, it is the most solemn affair. All these guys are standing around. They very soberly and somberly drink a shot of something. And then they cut this cake just so quietly and slowly. I'm like, you guys aren't excited for cake?
Nope. And he doesn't even want to eat the cake. Like,
Well, that's how you know Nazis are bad dudes. He doesn't even like cake.
yeah, he can do no good if he doesn't like cake.
General Marx is heading to the war games thing that they're gonna do at N, and they're like, "Well, this time you have to be Eisenhower," and he's like, "Easy." He's like, "I know how to defeat us," and they're like, "How would you do it?" He's like, "I'd invade Normandy because nobody expects it." And then later on in the movie, once they find out that in fact the Allies have invaded Normandy, you just see him being like, "Well, I was right." The real Marx, he's the one who drafted the initial plan for the attack on the Russians in June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. He was actually wounded there and he lost his leg. And then 6 days after we see him in this movie, he died in an Allied air attack.
By 11 past midnight on June 6th, British paratroopers are on gliders and en route to the Orne River, where their objective will be to capture and hold a bridge, which was Operation Pegasus, and it was led by Major John Howard, played by Richard Todd. So Richard Todd was actually a part of Operation Pegasus in World War II, and he was offered to play himself, but he didn't want to be such a small part of the war, so he chose Major Howard instead.
That's really cute. He was like, I admire this guy. I would like to play him in a film.
He was the part of the forces that came up as reinforcements, so he could have just as easily been in a movie. He could have replaced, I guess, Sean Connery, but Sean Connery also had to be in it. Sean Connery actually filmed this, and he asked that this could be quick, because next thing he went on to do was James Bond, and that was starting at that time, so he wasn't a big actor yet.
No, I mean, he's not in this movie too much, but there's there's so many, like, if you're familiar with actors from the 60s, this movie is there's barely a non-famous face among them.
It's very true. You know who else is in it? Paul Anka.
I know. I didn't put him in the notes either, but yeah, he is also in this.
He's at the end of my notes about the movie. We'll get to it when we get to it.
So now we're in Caen, which is a town in Normandy. It's 1:07 a.m. The Germans are running around in a tizzy as the fake paratroopers are dropped. Janine, our resistance fighter, she's helping to guide paratroopers in the darkness. She ends up having a battle with a patrolling German, but she succeeds in yanking him off of a bridge so that he can't stop this train from coming. And of course, the train hits the track where the resistance have fucked it up and it derails. I really enjoyed that scene because you see the train coming and it's all blacked out in the dark, obviously, and it just like goes right off the tracks. I was like, man, I love a good train derailment. You just don't see good train derailments in the movies these days.
No, and all the stunts are so neat. All like the battle scenes and all the explosions, they're all fairly real, I think. And obviously all practical. And I miss the times when everything was practical.
Yeah, me too.
Major General Max Pamsel, played by Wolfgang Price, who's also in the other movie. What did we call it? Is it A Bridge Too Far? Yes, he's in that movie. Who's the Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, is finding all of this very suspicious. He's not buying the line he keeps getting about how this is clearly just a diversion because everyone knows the Allies would never attack at Normandy or in this shitty weather that they're having. However, he's having difficulty reaching anyone or convincing them of his point of view. So the Germans were really their own worst enemy at this point. And all the phone lines have been cut, which doesn't help either.
Yeah, it's really not helping. Yeah, it's funny because they keep being like, "Listen, every other time the Allies have attacked, if you look at Sicily, if you look at Operation Torch in North Africa, if you look everywhere, they always wait for a nice day. So they certainly would never attack during this storm."
It's always at dawn, too. They're like, they will not attack in the dark.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a group of paratroopers land square in the town of St. Mère-Église. Because of the poor visibility and a number of other factors, the paratroopers just ended up all over Normandy. A lot of them were not where they were supposed to be, and we definitely see that in Band of Brothers, where guys end up having to fight with little groups of soldiers that are not part of their unit and, sort of improvise as they go along because they're not anywhere near their objective and that kind of stuff. So these guys land right in town, and unfortunately for them, the whole village is awake because they're battling a fire, and the local German troops are all out keeping an eye on everyone. And this results in many casualties. Although Private John Steele, played by Red Buttons, from the 82nd Airborne survives, dangling from a church steeple by his parachute. I really got a kick out of this guy. He's in the plane before the drop, and he's mouthing something, and then you get closer to him, and he's saying, "Bonjour, mademoiselle. Je suis américain." And he's just practicing how he's gonna talk to the French ladies when he gets on the ground.
This guy's a whole vibe, and I will steal your note. Still says he was in so much shock that he never even heard the church bells. And in some miracles, there's a dummy of him on the church today, and I've seen it, and it's so funny. It's so ugly looking. It's like an actual just. Probably like a mannequin or something in like battle dress. It's so funny.
Yes, I really get a kick out of the fact that they still commemorate that to this day. And yeah, this poor guy was dangling there for quite a long time. He ended up playing dead after a while because he didn't want to just be shot while he was hanging. And the church bells are just ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. And later he's like, "Yeah, they didn't even register." He's like, "I was so keyed up that I just didn't even hear the church bells, or I don't remember hearing them."
And we also see the mayor of Some Miracles in this film. And when I visited Some Miracles, I actually saw the son of the mayor, who's still there today. And they talked about this fire that's going on in the town, right? The fire that they're trying to put out. That's also another reason why so many of them dropped in the middle of the town, because they thought that the Pathfinders had set that fire to indicate the drop zone, which was not true, obviously.
It's pretty grim. Obviously, these guys are drifting out of the sky, and the Germans are it's just a turkey shoot. It's pretty grim.
Yeah, a lot of them died. It's horrible to watch. But at the same time, you get the funny kind of comic relief of Steel hanging on the tower, so it's hard to find it really serious and funny at the same time. And he also gets shot in the foot, which is no fun.
No. And I do think Ryan does a good job of that in his book, where because he adds in these little moments of humor, because sometimes funny stuff does happen unexpectedly, even in really serious situations. And I think he really just effectively kind of drops those in here and there. So you're like, oh, these are still people. And sometimes things don't go as expected. And sometimes it's funny.
It also makes the drama and like the tragedy of what's happening even more tragic. Because there's a
Yeah.
guy hanging from the tower, which is a ridiculous thing to have happened. I don't recall how he even gets down from there.
You don't see it in the film, but in real life, the Germans come up and get him basically, and they take him prisoner.
Shame. I would have liked for him to escape, but there's really no chance. Also, can I say Red Buttons? What a great name to have as an actor.
Definitely great, and he does get such a fun character role in this movie.
Yeah. There are British, American, and Canadian paratroopers scattered all over Normandy at this point. Schultz, alone in the dark, that's our private, finds another group of paratroopers, and this is when they kind of. Earlier, they introduced the cricket, like the little clicker that they have, and they spend a lot of time playing with it in the movie. But they pass right by a German patrol in the dark, which I thought was so confusing. I was like, wait, why are they not responding to each other? They should have been able to see each other. But he's like, wait, those were Germans! And nobody responds.
This comes straight from the book. So it happened, supposedly. Basically, this group of American paratroopers are walking along the road and they see a group of what they think are Americans. And by the time they get close enough to realize that they're Germans, the same thing is happening to the Germans at the same time. Like, they think these are other Germans, and then they get close and they're like, actually, these are not other Germans. And both of the groups are so surprised that nobody makes a move and they just walk right past each other.
I wonder how many of these guys just didn't want to kill another human being at this point of the war. They were like, we've just gotten here. We're not gonna start this war when we don't have to.
Yeah, and I think you're just in this weirdly surreal situation where you're in the dark countryside at night and you walk past these people, and as soon as you're past them, you're like, did that really happen? You know?
Yeah. Another thing that I found really kind of heartbreaking was that Schultz has a buddy, and this buddy has landed somewhere near a farm, and he hears something, and he takes his clicker and he clicks once, and the reply should be two clicks, and you think you heard two clicks, but then turns out it's a German loading his rifle, and it sounds exactly like the clicker. It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, there's a couple little moments in this movie. There's another one too that I wanted to mention that comes straight from the book where these, I think they're Americans, they come up and they're clearing out a machine gun nest, maybe, and the Germans are yelling, please, please. And
Yeah.
the Americans shoot them all. And then one of them turns to the other and says, what do you think bitta bitta means?
Yeah. If you're not too serious about this movie, you could see that and find it funny because the comedic timing on it is quite funny. But it is obviously very tragic at the same time. Meanwhile, Vandervoort, our fearless leader, played by John Wayne, has a broken ankle, but he'll press on. What a badass this actual real life man was.
Yes, I pulled a quote about Vandervoort from the book where Ryan says, bad luck had dogged Vandervoort. He had always taken his job seriously, sometimes too seriously. Unlike many another army officer, Vandervoort had never had a popular nickname, nor had he permitted himself the kind of close, easy relationship with his men that other officers enjoyed. Normandy was to change all that, and more. It was to make him, as General Matthew B. Ridgway later recalled, one of the bravest, toughest commanders I ever knew. Vandervoort was to fight on his broken ankle for 40 days, side by side with the men whose approval he wanted most.
How the fuck do you go on a broken leg?
Man, just imagine it. They mention it in the book too, the bit where the medic comes up to him and the medic's like, yeah, it's broken. And Vandervoort's like, Kate, lace up my boot really tight.
This can't be like healthy for your leg. I feel like this will not have healed well.
Right. I mean, I don't know what happened to Vandervoort after the war, but I can't imagine that ankle was in great shape for the rest of his life.
Pliskat is in his bunker on the beach, and he is passing increasingly urgent messages up the line about all the planes passing by overhead. He knows something is up, but no one else really seems to believe him. Von Rundstedt tries to get the two reserve panzer divisions up to the beach, but no one wants to wake Hitler up. Apparently, Hitler had taken a sleeping pill and he actually slept through the first half of the invasion because he was asleep. What do our favorite navigator and Hitler have in common? Just the fact that they slept through D-Day.
Unfortunate.
Pliskat soon actually sees the Allied armada for itself on the horizon, and this is when he starts yelling at his commanding officer, I take it. Just absolutely yelling, can't you hear what's going on? And everybody else ends up being like, wait, what's happening? And at the same time, as he sees the armada coming, there's a French villager who has a house on the coastline, and he's so excited that he's waving a little French flag around. Well, his house is being shot at by the Allies, and it's so funny.
Yeah, his house is being extremely shelled. Like the windows are all blown out and it's rocking, and his poor wife is screaming, and he's just like, "Yeah, the Allies are here." He's running around. Plus, Cat really cracked me up. Like the part where he's like, "I see 5,000 ships," and the other guy's like, "Don't be ridiculous. They don't even have 5,000 ships." And he's like, "There's 5,000 ships!" Like he's just so mad that he's not being taken seriously.
Also, the way he tries to get back on the phone while there's barely any of the bunker left.
Yeah. I did read somewhere that apparently Pluscat may have slightly over embroidered his role in D-Day and that apparently he was not at the beachfront bunker. He was at the sort of rear command post. But nevertheless, apparently the guys who were in that bunker, they essentially shot at the Allies until they ran out of ammunition.
Yeah. Some other people said of Pluskat that he was not at all in a command position. He was instead at the bar having a drink with some ladies.
Well, listen, can you blame him? The landings began just after 6:30 a.m. on Omaha Beach and at 6:44 a.m. on Utah Beach. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, played by Henry Fonda, friend of the pod, we've seen him in some other stuff. And this is the son of President Theodore Roosevelt, is the assistant commander of the 4th Infantry Division, and he has insisted on being on Utah Beach with his men, even though this is highly irregular for a general because, as you can imagine, they don't want them to get killed. They're on the beach, and he realizes that they're actually in the wrong landing spot. But he's basically like, oh, we're going to start the war from here. Like, there's no point in us getting all of our shit and going over to where we're supposed to be, whatever. Like, the reinforcements will figure it out. Meanwhile, Priller, our German fighter pilot, he gets his 2 planes going to strafe the beaches, and he survives the day. It really cracked me up because his buddy, it's literally just the 2 of them, right? Because the whole rest, like all the planes have been moved way back behind the line. And his buddy is like, I'm trying to get some sleep. And he's like, well, the invasion has started. Your prospects for getting some sleep are excellent.
Yeah, these two crack me up. Like, there's no one else there. It's just, it's kind of sad.
I'm going to read the Ryan passage from the book about Omaha Beach because he is, he's a popular historian. So the goal of some of his writing sometimes is to be stirring. And he was a guy who liked to write about courage and acts of valor and that kind of stuff. The guys are approaching the beach and there's all these obstacles everywhere. Rommel's big obstacles. Have you ever seen photos of D-Day? There are those big metal things on the beach to keep the boats from coming in. And it says, back of the defenses, the beach itself was deserted. Nothing and no one moved upon it. Closer and closer the boats pressed in, 500 yards, 450 yards. Still no enemy fire. Through waves that were 4 to 5 feet high, the assault craft surged forward, and now the great bombardment began to lift, shifting to targets further inland. The first boats were barely 400 yards from the shore when the German guns, the guns that few believed could have survived the raging Allied air and sea bombardment, opened up. Through the din and clamor, one sound was nearer, deadlier than all the rest, the sound of machine gun bullets clanging across the steel, snout-like noses of the boats. Artillery roared, mortar shells rained down. All along the 4 miles of Omaha Beach, German guns flayed the assault craft. It was H-hour. They came ashore on Omaha Beach, the slogging, unglamorous men that no one envied. No battle ensigns flew for them, no horns or bugles sounded, but they had history on their side. They came from regiments that had bivouacked at places like Valley Forge, Stony Creek, Antietam, Gettysburg, that had fought in the Argonne. They had crossed the beaches of North Africa, Sicily, and Salerno. Now they had one more beach to cross. They would call this one Bloody Omaha.
That's very striking, and it's funny to me to hear that, and then to know that they sanitized this movie of all its blood. There's no blood in this movie whatsoever. And James Jones was actually one to complain to the director about this, because he said about it, what was Omaha Beach if not bloody?
We should remind everyone that James Jones wrote From Here to Eternity and The Thin Red Line, and certainly didn't shy away from depicting violence in the stuff that he wrote about.
And also was a hater of the back then modern war movie.
Yeah, he didn't like this, like, sanitized version that glorified everything, right?
No. I wonder how his involvement in the writing of the script for this one changed the script, knowing that he felt that way. Obviously, it did end up being sanitized, but I think there was probably a studio requirement rather than a choice by the writers.
So Ryan did not get along with Zanuck, the producer, because Zanuck wanted to make a war movie and Ryan wanted to be historically accurate. They clashed quite a lot. And then they ended up having such a dispute that all of these other writers were brought in to make small adjustments. But the nature of the changes that they made were so minor that Ryan still ended up getting the full writing credit. Like he's the one that you see in the credits. And the guys who were brought in, like James Jones, and actually Eric Maria Remarque, who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front, was brought in to do some of the German scenes, to do a little tweaking around there. But yeah, these guys mostly were making sort of changes to make the dialogue more like, they were kind of like Brit picking, American picking, German picking, like make it more like culturally realistic, so to speak. So they made changes, but they didn't make substantial changes, I gather.
Interesting. It's also funny that because they hated each other so much, the associate producer that also worked on this, who later went on to work on Tora Tora Tora, actually had to be like a liaison between the two because they just couldn't stand each other.
Cornelius Ryan was a guy who was very opinionated. He famously did not get along with Stephen Ambrose, author of Band of Brothers. He definitely was a guy, like, if there's a topic, he had a thought on it, you know?
British landings, they happen on Sword Beach at 6:53. And some memorable figures that are involved are acting Captain Colin Maud, played by Kenneth Moore, Beachmaster at Juno Beach, Private Bill Millen, played by Leslie Gillespie, what a great name, Piper of the 1st Special Service Brigade, and I enjoyed this very much. Just to hear the bagpipes coming in, just being shelled to shit, but still playing the bagpipes.
Yeah, they did have a real piper who was with them on D-Day, and he's just standing on the beach piping, and everyone else is like, "Get down, you mad bastard!" It's like, "No, I came here to play the pipes." I just, like, imagine you're just fighting for your life, and you hear some guy just playing a lively tune on the old bagpipes.
Bagpipes are kind of terrifying, so I do get that they can also be sort of a mechanism to scare people away.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and to inspire the guys on your own side. And I particularly mentioned Colin Maude, the Beachmaster, because there's a part that really cracked me up where I think it's a half track where the engine's not working because it's full of seawater. And he's like, "Are you gonna get that thing going or what?" And the guys are like, "Well, sir, the engine's not working." And he's like, "Well, as my grandmother always told me, sometimes you just have to give it a good whack." And he smacks it with his walking stick and the engine starts right up.
I think he even says before that, like, if you can't get it going, then you have to carry it.
Yeah. So, as many people already know, but for casual listeners, the Americans landed at Omaha and Utah Beach, and then the British landed at Sword and Gold Beach, and the Canadians landed at Juno Beach. And Ryan doesn't spend a lot of time on the Canadians in his book, and there are barely any in the movie, but he does mention that they had a few bloody clashes with the Germans on Juno Beach and then proceeded inland fairly quickly. So, even though Ryan didn't mention the Canadians a lot, you know I will. So,
I mean, of course.
yeah. So, just a quick Canada mention here. More than 14,000 Canadian soldiers landed or parachuted into France on D Day, sustaining 1,074 casualties. 10,000 sailors of the Canadian Navy and 15 squadrons of airmen from the RCAF played supporting roles. The objective of those on the beaches was to cut the Caen Bayou Road, so essentially be able to control German movements, to take the Carpiquet airport and to form a beachhead linking Gold and Sword beaches because Juneau was right in the middle of those two. In the first waves of the assault, almost one in every two men was either wounded or killed. And there are a lot of firsthand accounts where a guy will be like, "Yeah, of the 10 guys who went out of the landing craft in front of me, 8 of them were shot." So just obviously really harrowing. And although none of the Allied forces achieved all of their D Day objectives, the Canadians managed to push further inland than Allied troops on any of the other beaches. I found a quote where there's a French civilian named Jean Houel, and he emerged at the end of the day from a bomb shelter underneath the ruins of his home at Courceuil-sur-Mer, which is a little town right on the edge of Juno Beach. And I've been there actually. They have a really affordable, really great little museum about the landings at Juno. If you're ever in the neighborhood, it's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, so this guy, Jean Houel, comes out of his bomb shelter. He's out there to welcome his liberators. He sees all these guys in these British style helmets, and he's like, "Here they are, the Tommies," because he thinks they're British. And he remembers one Canadian soldier proudly correcting him in French, "Je suis Canadien."
There's a character on the beach at Juno Beach, and they have to get the pigeons out to send messages because they cannot use the TV cruise means of communications. And then they release the homing pigeons, and they fly in the wrong direction toward Germany. There's this guy who calls them traitors for flying in the direction, and it's actually Canadian journalist Charles Lynch, who landed with the Canadians and covered the landing for Reuters. So I thought it was a funny little extra Canada mention there.
Amazing.
Rommel, who's in Germany, if you recall, gets a phone call that he doesn't like, saying that the invasion has started.
Truly wild that the invasion starts, well, I mean, technically the invasion starts the night before with the paratroopers, but the guys start landing on the beaches at 6:30 in the morning. Rommel doesn't get a phone call until like 10 a.m. It just feels wild that it took so long for him to find out that this invasion that he's supposed to be pushing back into the sea is happening.
Imagine being Rommel at that point, celebrating his wife's birthday with some nice shit. Meanwhile, at Point du Hoc at 7:11 a.m., I just wanted to say 7:11. I thought it was funny. The American Army Rangers do their thing, only to find out that there aren't even any big guns in the emplacements that they've scaled cliffs to take out. So these cliffs were pretty damn challenging, and there were Germans like shooting at them and trying to get them to fall down, and the scene is like 5 minutes long. And then they get up there and there's no guns.
Yeah, they ended up finding the guns that were supposed to be at that emplacement like a mile inland. Super unfortunate because they sustained high casualties doing this. And there was a member of the French resistance who had actually sent a message to London before D Day being like, those guns that I told you are there aren't there anymore, or they're not there yet. Or he tried to transmit a message saying that the guns weren't there. And it just, there was too many layers of people and, bureaucracy to get through, and so the Rangers never got the message, and it cost them a lot of lives.
Yeah, it's sad. It feels kind of like a anticlimax in the movie, but obviously they've just scaled these mountains and then there are these rocks. And in the movie it's 5 minutes, but I don't know how long it took in real life, but I'm guessing quite a long time to get up there.
Yeah. They really wanted to get it done because they're like, "If we don't take these guns out, they're gonna be mowing down our guys on the beach. We can't let that happen." I did get a kick out of the one guy who's still wearing his Mae West, his life jacket. And they're like, "Why are you still wearing your life jacket?" And he's like, "Well, I can't swim." And this, I think, was taken sort of from the book. There is a firsthand account that Ryan quotes where this guy, he's one of the Rangers, he's climbing the cliff, and all of a sudden his life jacket inflates and he's like, "Bleh," like he almost falls off the rope because he was not expecting to all of a sudden just have all this life jacket all around him.
Wow, imagine if that was to be the end of him. That would have been kind of hilarious, but also sad.
Yeah, it's mostly funny because he did not die. Hitler's awake by now. We don't see him in the movie, but apparently this conversation was just something else. Like he didn't really believe that the Normandy invasion was the real invasion. He just kept insisting that it was diversionary. And we've talked about this before where this huge, huge bulk of the German army was waiting at Pas de Calais, and Hitler didn't move them away from there till the end of July because he was just so sure that Normandy was a diversion. And just everyone is so busy telling him about the invasion that no one asks him about the reserve panzers. And von Rundstedt's sidekick is like, "You gotta call Hitler and ask him for these panzers." And von Rundstedt is like, "I am not calling that Bohemia corporal to beg on my knees for these panzer divisions." And it's true that von Rundstedt in real life did not call Hitler at any point on D-Day. So at long last, meanwhile, like for the Allies, Howard's soldiers holding the bridge over the Orne are reinforced by Lovett and his guys as the beach storming troops meet up with the paratroopers. And it really made me laugh because Howard just keeps hearing this disembodied voice saying, "Hold until relieved." And so when the guys come to relieve him, they can hear the bagpipes in the distance. And the one guy's like, "I hear bagpipes." And the other guy's like, "You definitely don't hear bagpipes." And he's like, "No, I really hear bagpipes." So, yeah, so these guys show up, and then, you hear the disembodied voice again, "Hold until relieved." And of course, now they're relieved. So he's very pleased with himself. And meanwhile, Vandervoort and his paratroopers proceed to take and hold the town of St. Mère-Église, while French commandos battle it out at Ouistreham.
Where there's a casino, which is apparently one of the very few mistakes that Ryan even makes in his book. Because apparently, by the time they got there, the casino had been replaced by a bunker.
They have quite the scrap over it, that's for sure.
But because they had already built this casino for the movie, they decided not to change it in the movie and just kept the casino.
I mean, it's a fun scene when they're across the street in this building that's just battered to shit. And they look over and they just see this massive gun poking out from this little hole in the casino. Yeah, there's lots of fun explosions and running around and stuff happening in this part.
The Americans are bogged down at Omaha. Carter recruits some engineers and develops a plan to get the guys off the beach by blowing up a German defensive wall, which is successful. I think we see something similar in Saving Private Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of that movie. And there's a quote here: from the movie, only two kinds of people are gonna stay on this beach. The ones who are dead and the ones who will be.
Yeah, and that comes right from Ryan's book too. Somebody overheard that on the real Omaha beach on the day.
That's dreadful.
Yeah, I guess you gotta get off the beach though. Schultz encounters wounded pilot Campbell, the second part of Richard Burton's little cameo. He's been shot down. He's got a massive leg wound that's been safety pinned shut by a medic, which also comes from Ryan's book. Truth is always stranger than fiction. And Schultz sums up the confusion and chaos of the day with, I wonder who won.
Just tells you how, like, far away from any of the targets they were.
Yeah, and, like, I mean, even there's just so many Germans who are still not acknowledging that the invasion is taking place. There's one part in Ryan's book where someone asks, well, "Oh, if the invasion's taking place, tell me where the focal point is." And then Ryan says something like, "Any private anywhere on the Normandy front could have told you that."
And then the movie ends with the same shot we began on, with the lone helmet on the beach, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, me too. It became quite an iconic image, I think.
Yeah, it's just for fun. If you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to go look up the longest yarn, and you will find this image in yarn, which was made for the 80th commemoration of the invasion of Normandy.
Pause. I'm looking it up right now.
They did a bunch of scenes actually, but this one is the main one.
My god, yeah, they have all the boats and stuff at one part. Guys on the beach, they have the obstacles are made out of yarn.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
I
it's
need to
a
see the helmet. Hang
yeah,
on.
it's a ridiculous amount of yarn.
Amazing. Wow, I love you know what? This is classic, as my mom would say, people with lots of time on their hands.
Yeah, and an obsession for World War II.
That's fair, man. If I could make stuff out of yarn, I can't guarantee I would not be making this shit out of yarn.
I do have some extra notes about the movie making. We did some of them during the discussion already, but I will say some other ones. Like, this movie was the biggest hit of 1962, and it remained the movie that made the most money and was the most expensive of a black and white movie until Schindler's List displaced it over 30 years later. So that's a long time for it to be the biggest moneymaker, but also the most expensive. There's a theme song in the movie also near the end, which was written by Paul Anka, apparently, and it was used as the regimental march of the Canadian Airborne Regiment for a time.
The song plays during the credits. I think it's the one that's just called "The Longest Day,"
Yeah,
and I watched the credits the whole way through because the song was such a bop. I was just walking around in my living room, like, doing stuff, but I was kind of doing, like, this little, like, march while I was doing it, and Oscar was just sitting on the couch just like, "What are you doing?"
and there's a bunch more stuff you can learn about this movie. This was a big deal. So if you want to do more research, there's a bunch more you can do, and I would definitely also recommend you read Ryan's book to get sort of an everyman's view, but also like the commander view, and everyone is in this book, really.
I really think it's the authoritative popular history about D-Day. I mean, there were some things that we know about D-Day now that Ryan just simply didn't know about at that point, just because of when it was published. So he didn't have access to certain information that we have access to now. But it's an incredible read. It's not super long, it's less than 300 pages. And it just gives you such a good sense of what it was actually like.
Yeah, Ryan makes you feel like you were actually in the room with the people you're listening to or you're reading about. It feels like you're just another person in the room, just participating. And that's it for most of this episode. We do have to rate this movie, but before we do, I would like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcast, or you can send this episode to a friend, which you should because it's almost D-Day. And yeah, it kind of just deserves it. No notes from Sam today, no notes from Sam.
I don't have anything to add. They should send it to a friend because it's almost D-Day.
Perfect. And I guess now we have to rate this movie. I feel like we should rate it traitor pigeons out of 10.
How many Trader Pigeons out of 10 would you rate this movie?
I would give this movie, I don't know, 6.8 trader pigeons out of 10. I couldn't get into it as much as I would have liked. And I feel like it's more a me problem, perhaps, than a movie problem. So maybe I should watch it again and give it a higher rating next time we talk about it. How about you?
Yeah, I'll give it a 7.7 because it did occur to me when I was watching it when I saw that it was 3 hours. I was like, "The longest day, more like the longest movie." But I do feel like it had to be that long in order to do justice to the sheer array of characters that had to be introduced in order to give you some sense of what happened at D-Day, and they were trying to be as historically accurate as possible. All of the characters in the movie are based on real people, and I think there's a lot of specific moments in the movie where, to me, it looked so much like pictures and footage that I've seen from D-Day, things that I know that they filmed for the movie, like not the real Normandy footage, that I was just like, wow. Like there's a scene where the soldiers are running up onto, I think it's Utah Beach, and there's all the obstacles in the sand, and it just looks so breathtakingly real. And I think they did a great job of almost capturing it for posterity and creating a movie that in many ways is a lot of people's touchstone for D-Day, similar to the way that the book is. And I think that, especially watching it now, because I don't know as many of the actors, probably when you were watching it at the time, the fact that the cast was so star-studded might have been distracting, but I don't think it is. I just get to benefit from the acting skills of all of these great actors without necessarily immediately recognizing all the faces, or at least, not recognize them in a way that's distracting. It's not like seeing Brad Pitt in a movie for me. Yeah, I just think that Ryan brought his storytelling A game to the movie in a similar way that he does in his books. And I don't know if this is going to be your movie if you're someone who is not really into combat scenes and that kind of stuff, if you prefer a more intellectual sort of war movie. But if you want to watch effectively a historical reenactment of D-Day, then this is the film for you. I think they pulled off what they meant to pull off.
I also think it helps, for us at least, that we know who all the commanders are at this point. It helps if you know who you're looking at a little bit more, and if you know the context. Obviously, we know quite a lot about D-Day already. Like, I feel like people might struggle if they feel like I felt when I was watching the Battle of Britain and didn't know anything about it, but it's a good way to learn, for sure, and it's a nice way in because you get all these different points of view. It does sometimes feel like, especially the Germans, where you're like, they can't be seriously ignoring all of these signs, but apparently it did happen like that. So, truth really is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess that's it for this episode. Are you reading anything new? Exciting?
Yes, I'm reading Katyn by L.S. Adamovich. It is a novel about Belarusian partisans in World War II, and they made a movie based on it called Come and See, which we could definitely cover on the podcast. And so far, what I'm finding interesting is that there don't appear to be chapters. It's just like continuous action. So yeah, I'm maybe a quarter of the way through, and so far I'm finding that a neat process. I'm just so accustomed to formatting my reading time into like, okay, I'll read 2 chapters and then I'll go do something else. And in this book, I really have to be like, all right, pull yourself away. I have to keep track.
Well, that works if it's really interesting, I guess. It would not
Yeah.
work as well if it wasn't interesting. I feel like this movie is. It's been on our list for a long time. Like, we have a big mega list in a spreadsheet that has like 300 movies in it. And this one has been on that for a long time. So we will have to watch it. I'm not reading anything currently. But I did get a bunch of book recs from my cousin that I just saw, so maybe I'll have something new to tell you next week, maybe.
Nice.
And this weekend, I'm going over to England, so I'll be away. But our scheduling will continue unharmed.
Yep. And when this episode airs, I will be done my exam. So hopefully you didn't fuck this up, future me.
Let's circle back on that next time we speak and
Okay.
record. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of Rosie the Reviewer. You can find us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode to a friend. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. Or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, for more information. Bye!
Bye.